going to show how to add a rotation to a gradient using the procedural textures. And I'm going to start with the gradient that I'd set up in my previous video and just show how to add a rotation to that. In an ordinary gradient, it's fairly easy to add a rotation. With procedural textures, it's quite a bit more complicated. But once you get the formula set up, it's easy to do the rotation. To get started, I'm going to start with a new document. I'll set it to 1024 by 1024 pixels. Make sure that it's in RGB mode and create that. And then I need to have it filled with something. I'm just going to fill it with black. And I'm also going to use the move tool. And then I'm going to go over to live filters and add a procedural texture live filter. I'll start by adding a single equation and a real number input. I'll assign the equation to all three channels. I'll set this up to 1 for now. And the first thing I'm going to do is to set up a variable for my coordinate system. I'll call it V0 because I'm going to be modifying this later. So I'll set V0 equal to vec2 of Rx comma Ry times A divided by W. And then I'm going to look at oscsc, the alternating oscillator, I guess I could call that, of V0, like that. So that's sort of the checkerboard pattern, and I'm going to use a checkerboard pattern to show how the rotation works for this one. In order to rotate a pair of coordinates, you need to multiply by the rotation matrix. The rotation matrix is given by cosine of theta minus sine of theta, cosine of theta. To rotate this xy pair of coordinates by this matrix, you take the first element times the top element here, and then take the second element by the bottom element. So cosine of theta times x and minus sine theta times y. You add those two together. So for the first element of the rotated coordinate system, I have x times the cosine of theta minus y times the sine of theta. And then the second coordinate, the y coordinate of this, will be x times the sine of theta plus y times the cosine of theta. To add this rotation to my coordinate system, I'm going to start by adding an angle input. I'm going to label that th for theta, and I'll also label this one scale. Now I'm going to add a new variable, varv equals vec2 of v0.x for the original x coordinate times cosine of theta, cosine of th for cosine of theta, minus v0.y for the y coordinate times the sine of theta. And then the second coordinate is going to be v0.x times sine of theta, and added plus v0.y times cosine of theta. This is what it looks like so far. I have my v0, which is a two-element vector consisting of rx and ry. I'm multiplying that by a scaling factor a and dividing by w, the width of the document. This factor gets applied to each of the elements of the vector. Now, to access those individual elements of vector v0 in this next formula, or the next part of the equation, I can do that by putting a dot x at it. And the dot x will access the first element, and the dot y will access the second element of that vector. So now to create this rotation vector coordinate system v, I'm going to set up a vec2. It's going to be v0.x times cosine of theta minus v0.y times sine of theta, and then a comma, v0.x sine of theta plus v0.y cosine of theta. And then I'm showing those in this checkerboard oscillator osci as the coordinate vector v, and applying that to all three channels. Now that I've got my rotational coordinates set up, I can rotate this. And so this rotates in 45 degrees, or if I hold the shift key down, I can rotate it to any angle. I can now set up something that looks a little bit more like a gradient, and I should be able to rotate that. So if I just set up OSC with an S curve and v.x, like that, I have my vertical lines, but now I should be able to rotate these. So I'm going to go ahead and add a gradient to this one. And I'll just choose this sort of violet gradient. I'm going to drag this in so that it is above the procedural texture. I'm going to set this up as a variable. So variable t1 equals OSC. And I want to add a couple of controls for this like I had in my previous video. So I want to create a slider and an offset. So the slider I'll call I, the offset I'll label OF, and this one will be, I guess, fader. That one goes from 0 to 1, and then the offset will be able to go positive or negative to get a wider range on that. And I'm going to multiply this. I'm going to set up a semicolon and then do T1 times I plus OF. It just makes it a little neater by grouping it into these variables like that. And now I can sort of adjust this to a narrower range and bring in different amounts of gradient. And I can also adjust these to different angles. If I wanted to do a waveform like I had before, I could add an oscsc and add a v.y in here, and then add this gradient to the v.y like that. Now I can create, sort of have my wave, but I can also rotate it to whatever angle I want to. This is what I have so far. I've got my rotation coordinate vector, then I've got another variable, t1, which is oscsc v.y plus this v.x. I could put a multiplier in here so I could scale that like I did in the previous video. And then I'm scaling the T1 variable, the overall texture pattern, by I, and then adding an offset to it, OF. Now I could replace, inside of this oscillator, I could just replace that with V, and then I can have a alternating pattern like this. If I zoom out a little bit, you can see it as sort of a polka dot pattern. And of course, now we're getting into something that's more like a texture. If I change this to just OSC, it will look like that. And then if I add an RT on it, it will look like that. All right, so it looks like this now. I've changed my texture to just be a single oscillator of the variable V, and then the rest of it is unchanged. Let me know if you have any comments or questions, and thanks for watching.